Hello everybody, and welcome back to a brand new video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2022 Georgia Senate race and talking about a new poll that came out from the Trafalgar Group. The poll showed Herschel Walker, the Republican challenger to incumbent Democrat Raphael Warnock, leading by about 0.8%. So the poll showed Walker at 47.5% of the vote, Raphael Warnock at 46.7% of the vote, the Libertarian candidate, whose name is Chase Oliver, at 2.9% of the vote, and then another 2.9% of voters undecided. So let's talk what this means. Now, first of all, this is a mixed bag for Republicans. Now, it's always good when Republicans are leading in the polls, and in 2020 on 538's average, Biden was up by about a point, and he won Georgia by 0.2. So the polls were very good, but they still did underestimate Republican support by about a point. And Trafalgar, and the fact that Republicans are leading in a poll is always good for them, especially in a state like Georgia, which is always so close. But on the other side, or I guess on the other hand, it's only a 0.8% lead in a Trafalgar poll, which again has been rated as very, very biased towards the Republican Party. Now let's talk about Trafalgar and their polls that they've done as of late, or in the past as well, to just see how accurate they've been. So 538 gives them an A- rating, which is pretty good. I actually think that it's a little high. I would much rather have put Trafalgar in somewhere a bit lower, maybe B or C. But anyways, as you can see here, Trafalgar, if you look at their 2020 polls, they were actually pretty good in the Senate runoff. So their final Senate poll between Loeffler and Warnock, they had Loeffler winning by 1.3, Warnock won by 2.1, but they did get Ossoff right. So they had a mixed result in the runoff. But if you look at their polls, the presidential election here, it's not good. And in Georgia, actually, they had Trump winning Georgia by over 4%, despite Biden ending up winning it. They did pretty well in Florida. They had Trump winning Nevada by a point. He lost it by 2.4. They also missed Pennsylvania. They had Trump winning it by 2. He won it by 1.2. And then they actually were pretty good in Ohio. But their worst poll, really, to me, was Michigan, where they had Trump up by 2.5 and he lost by 3. Although I will say, to their credit, I believe that their final Wisconsin poll is actually quite good. They Biden up by 0.4. He won by 0.6. So again, I think a lot of it is really to me. I think that they're okay in the Rust Belt. They swung and missed on Michigan, but they were better in Wisconsin. They were better in Ohio. I do believe that they had the Senate race closer than most people expected. I'm actually pretty proud of my Michigan Senate race projection. I had Peters. I had Peters winning by 1.8, which I think is the exact margin he won by. So I'm happy with that. But a lot of pollsters are showing Peters up by 7 or 8%. And in reality, I knew it was much closer in Trafalgar, although they got it wrong. They had it within a point as well. But yeah, I think they have a big problem polling the Sun Belt, especially a state like Georgia. And let's hone in on Georgia. So as I said here, if you look at their final 2020 Georgia poll, they had Trump winning it by 4, despite the fact that Biden ended up winning it. If you look at their 2018 polls, if you go to their Georgia governor poll, they had Kemp winning by 12, and he only won by about a point and a half. So they swung and missed in Georgia in 2018. And then if you go to 2017, they missed some polls there as well. Although they did get um the special election in the 6th district, right? Although again, that was just one. And then finally in 2016, if you take a look at their Georgia poll, they also underestimated the Democrats there. They had Trump up by 6.5. He only won by 5. But again, decent track record, but in Georgia, consistently overestimating Trump, Kemp, and Kelly Loeffler. So again, it's always important to be skeptical. It's always important to remember what the polls mean. But I think if we're going to criticize Trafalgar, my job on this channel is to be as unbiased as I can. Like, if we're going to criticize Trafalgar, which rightfully so, because again, they have been pretty bad in Georgia in the past, let's also talk about where they've been good and what their polls mean. So let's look at this poll. Let's give them a second chance here. So one of the things that I like about the Trafalgar, which again, I don't really love Trafalgar a ton, but they do they do give you a nice write up, and they do show it pretty well. So they conducted this for 3 days. They had just under 1,100 respondents, 1.44% response rate. Likely voters, they did that screen. 2.9% margin of error, so this poll is well within the margin of error. 95% confidence, and then 50% response distribution. So again, pretty normal, pretty good stuff. But let's talk about the ballot here. So again, they have Warnock trailing by 0.8%. We know that. Also in the governor's race, we're not talking about here, Kemp ahead pretty solidly. He's past 50, so very good poll for Brian Kemp, which we're getting a ton of. And then party participation, they had the Democrats at 44%, Republicans at 42%. Pretty accurate sample again. Biden won Georgia, so I guess it was a more Democratic leaning electorate. But again, this is pretty good. The people saying they oversampled Democrats, I mean, maybe, but only by a point or so. And also, the 2022 electorate that shows up to vote in the Senate race would probably be Biden plus 3. Because again, I've talked about this theory that I and a lot of people have, right? Like on runoff day when Warnock and Ossoff won, that electorate is probably Biden plus 3 or Biden plus maybe 2, right? Like that electorate was a more Biden leaning electorate because a lot more rural Trump voters stayed home than Biden voters. And that's why we get more Biden favorable electorates in off year elections because suburban and urban voters are more likely to turn out in elections than rural voters. That's why we had a Biden leading electorate in Georgia. That's why we had a Biden leading electorate. We don't know this for sure, but I bet that the New York 19 electorate with Molinaro and Pat Ryan was probably more Biden leaning as well. And so, I think that's what we're seeing here. And then if you go to age participation as well, we'll look at that too. Again, not perfect because they do it by 18 to 24, and AP Votecast is 18 to 29. But we can make some educated guesses here. They actually did undersample young voters a bit, which I'll call them out for that. They only had them at 8%. So in 2020, they've been up 16% of the vote. And also, the thing is, we have to remember this is a wider block. But the thing is, it doesn't proportionally doesn't make too much sense. 25 to 34. Again, they do it differently, but I do think that the age group we get is 65 plus and 45 to 64, which again, they had 45 to 64 in Trafalgar in their poll, that it being 39%. This New York Times 37%, and again, this is a Trump leaning electorate, Republican leaning electorate. Then 65 plus, basically boomers, 23% in 2020, 24% in Trafalgar. So again, the age samples are a little tilted towards the Republicans, but it's still worth talking about, right? It's still pretty good. Now, the interesting thing here is that the ethnicity was actually a little tilted towards Democrats. So in 2020, if you look at the racial breakdown of the 2020 of the election in Georgia, if I can find it right here, they did actually have black voters making up about 32% of the electorate, which is a reasonable guess. In 2020, it was 29%. In the runoffs, I think it was 30.5%. So I think this is a little high. I think black voters make up 30 to 31% of the electorate, similar to what we saw in the runoffs, which again is still pretty good for Democrats. But again, if black voters make up 32% of the electorate on election day, I think Warnock is a heavy favorite to win for what it's worth. And then they had white voters at 60.3%, and they actually did undersample white voters. So again, the age stuff might have undersampled Democrats, but the ethnicity stuff probably undersampled Republicans. So it does kind of cancel out. And gender participation, again, fairly solid overall. Again, if you look at gender participation in 2020, whoa, I don't know why it went down all the way, but you could go to gender participation. 53% of Georgians who voted in the 2020 election were women. This poll, they have them being 55%. So again, that it kind of checks out. Maybe women are slightly oversampled here, but again, as we've seen, women have slightly higher turnout rates than men, and also in the wake of Dobbs, we've seen women registering like much more than men in these past 2 months. And so I think when you see, when you see these stats, like women have out registered men 5-1 in all these counties, I think women are going to spike as a share of the electorate in 2022. Again, we saw that in the Nebraska election, in the Minnesota election, in the New York 19 election, where women made up higher percentages of the electorate, and the urban/suburban Democratic leaning counties turned out more than their Republican rural counterparts. And so that's really what I think it comes down to. If you look at what we're dealing with for this electorate, Trafalgar actually did a pretty good job, and I know I don't like to give Trafalgar a ton of credit. If you remember me back in 2020, I slandered them for their Michigan poll. I think I called it like a joke of a poll or something, and I got a lot of hate for that because people were like, no, Trafalgar's good, and I'm like, no, they're not. And it's weird to see me give credit to Trafalgar, but again, I don't really have I'm not. I try to be as nonpartisan as I can be. Again, I don't really have an agenda to be pro or against Trafalgar, and so when Trafalgar puts out a good poll, I'll talk about it as much as I'll talk about their bad polls. And believe me, they have plenty of bad polls, but this is one of their good ones. So again, this poll, I think, it kind of lines up to what we're seeing. It's maybe a little bit biased to the Republicans because it is Trafalgar. But again, something we have to remember. Is that this is the crosstabs here. Check out, and for now, I'm going to assume that this is where they truly believe the state of the race is. So again, 538 throwing that into their average, it narrowed it up a little bit, but literally only by 0.1%. So yeah, now Raphael Warnock still has had, he's been down in the past three polls, but before that he was up. Research affiliate poll, he was up in Insider Advantage, he was up in the Fox News poll, up in Survey USA, up in University of Georgia, up in Beacon Research. He was even up by 12 in this poll, which I thought was kind of crazy. But anyways, yeah, that's really where we stand as of today in Georgia. I think it's be really close. The election were held today. I believe it would be within 2%. Although again, I have to go with 538 because again, the polls undershot Biden or undershot Trump in Georgia by about 0.8% in 2020. If they did a similar thing, Warnock would still be ahead. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you enjoyed my analysis of the poll. Really tight race in Georgia. So thanks so much for watching. See you all in the next one. Bye, guys.